Okay, we are going to go over Essay 2, the requirements, and I'll try to keep this video pretty brief. But I did want to touch on a couple things and make sure you've taken time to look over this and look over the sample essays before you watch the video because I'm going to try to move pretty quickly just to save us all some time. So Essay 2 is one of the two big essays in 1320, weighted 150 points, which is 15% of your grade. So this is definitely one that you want to spend some good time on and, really commit to being thorough in your proofreading and all that. So let's talk about content. This is an argumentative research essay. So you must obviously have a controversial topic. That might seem a little obvious, but sometimes students struggle with that and they want to make statements like, child abuse is wrong, or I have the example here, obesity is dangerous and unhealthy. Well, those are factual statements that most people would agree with. You want to have your claim should be one that there are people who agree with you and there are several people who disagree with you. It should be at least a two-sided issue. Now, the ideal would be that you would actually use your topic from Essay 1 that you've already explored, because that way, hopefully, you already have some sources on the topic. You've already given it a lot of thought. However, you're not required to stay with that topic. You are certainly, if you want to switch and do something else, maybe you're tired of that one, that's completely fine. And you're welcome to, shoot me an email with a topic idea if you're not sure if it would be appropriate for this paper. Some other guidelines, obviously, your paper must be argumentative. And as far as sources, the minimum is 5. So you have to have at least 5 sources. And then we have this requirement that out of the 5 sources, only 2 may come from the internet. The other 3 sources must be considered print. Now that might seem like unfair to you somehow, but as college students, you should, and I know the internet is where we do a lot of work, but part of scholarly academic research is being able to research other than just Googling. That is how educated people know how to find good sources that have good credentials, and there are notes on that you're supposed to be reading for the course notes on research. Now, you may find some of your print sources via the internet. So in order for them to be considered print, it just means that they have to be printed in some medium somewhere. So, for example, a lot of the database sources I would consider print sources because, they were printed in the scholarly journal in hard copy form, but the database is just making them available to you via the internet. So I hope that requirement makes sense. And if you use more than 5 sources, then you can use more than 2 websites in your essay. And just because I say you can use 2 web sources, they still need to be reliable academic sources. Length 1,000 to 1,200 words, which is about 3 or 4 pages. So it's really not that long. So don't let that overwhelm you that you have to write this super lengthy essay. It's really not bad. So the first thing you want to come up with is a thesis statement, and this will be your claim. And we'll be talking about different types of claims next week in our content. So you'll get a lot of good guidance as far as what makes it a good claim, what makes it a bad claim, that kind of thing. And then you really want to keep your thesis in front of you as you write. Like, your thesis statement is going to be the whole premise of your paper. And that is going to be, so every one of your body paragraphs should be supporting that claim. And I would start out with some type of tentative outline, and that just means, make a list of your reasons. Here is my claim. Here is why I think this is true. And once you have that, then start with your research. I would definitely make sure you have your sources before you start writing, because it is possible that you'll get into your research and just discover that there's not enough information out there, or you can't find the information you really need to prove your point, in which case you might need to change topics or at least tweak your topics. So I really encourage you to find those 5 sources before you actually start a draft of your essay. Otherwise, you may end up with some wasted time if you end up having to change topics. So some other reminders for writing, just the basics of academic writing. You want to avoid second person, so no you or your. Avoid first person. This is not the time to use personal examples. I might make a rare exception if you have specific experience with your topic. But for the most part, you want to stay away from first person, specifically statements like I think or I believe or in my eyes. You don't want any kind of those type of statements. Avoid contractions, can't, won't, don't. Use whole words just to maintain that more academic tone. Avoid slang or any other kind of just colloquial expressions. Here's something else. Students often struggle with verb tense. So make sure you're being consistent in whether you're using past or present tense. And then as you build this paper, those sentences you wrote or those reasons you listed for your outline are going to be the topic sentences for your paragraphs. So hopefully that'll give you a good sense of organization. I encourage students to try and get a first draft. Once you have your research, you're going with this topic, try to write a full first draft in one sitting because it really gives it a feel of unity, and then go back and revise as needed. Make sure you use transitions between and within your paragraphs. Make sure every time that you have a quote, paraphrase, or a summary that you introduce it, that you cite each one. Otherwise, you'll be flirting with plagiarism, and nobody wants that. So all paraphrased or summarized material, make sure you have that signal phrase. We've talked about that, where you say according to one author, or according to this source, or author John Doe comments, because especially with paraphrased and summarized material, because we don't have quotation marks, it needs to be very clear where that paraphrase begins, and then your in-text citation is going to show where it ends. Avoid stringing quotations together. When you have quotes and paraphrases just back to back, then it really does get quite choppy, and really the majority of the paper, over 50% of the paper, should be your writing. You're using these sources to support your argument. You're not just putting a bunch of sources together. Let's see. And then just some other reminders about integrating quotations. So, and I have here the key to doing well is preparation, organization, and making sure you allow yourself plenty of time and proofread. Okay, let's look really quickly. I want to point out a couple things about these assignments, these examples. So the first example I gave you is an argument on year-round education. And this is a positive example. This one is really well done. So I just want to point out a couple things. First of all, pretty good introduction. But I want to point out the thesis statement. Year-round education should be implemented in schools throughout the United States because of all the advantages it provides. So with this long of a paper, you don't need to list all your reasons. Just state your claim. And this is a claim of policy, which again, we'll learn about different types of claims next week. But it's simple, it's straightforward. We know exactly what the author's position is on this issue of year-round education. So that's the type of thesis statement that you want. And then I want to point out the topic sentences that the student uses are really good. First of all, year-round education is more beneficial because students do not have to relearn the information lost over their long summer break. And so that's his first reason why year-round education should be implemented, because, students don't have that summer memory loss. And so then the student goes on to support that statement with different sources and just kind of unpack it and explain it. And then his next topic sentence, his next paragraph, he has a good transition. A further advantage, as noted by Shields and Oberg, is that year-round education provides activities during each intersession to help to provide help for students who are struggling in their classes so they can catch up to the rest of their classmates. So he transitions to another reason that we should implement year-round education. And he provides more supporting quotes and paraphrases. And I feel like this essay, in general, just does a good example, is a good example of the balance of your argument, the author's argument, and supporting sources. He doesn't go, over the top, but there is also just really thorough research here. So I won't read the whole thing. I just wanted to point out those are, that's what makes this a good example. Then the other example I had for you, this is a weaker example, and I wanted to point out a couple reasons why. And in this one, actually, you can read my comments, what some of the problems are. Now, I'll remind you, with these sample essays, I don't comment on grammar or style. I only comment on content. So yes, there are some grammar issues here. Yes, there are some other just clarity issues, but I only commented on the content. So the first thing I'll point out here is, again, the claim. Too much significance and weight is given to the SAT in determining high school students' admission to college and their ability to qualify for scholarships, especially when the SAT does not evaluate the whole person. So you can see my comment is your thesis is too wordy and complex. It's not a very focused claim. And this claim would actually, I think, work better as a claim of policy. Basically, it would be easier just to state that we should do away with the SAT. The SAT should not be given to high school students. There should be other ways of evaluating high school graduates, and it would just be a lot more simple to state it that way. And then the problem that this student has throughout his or her paper is a problem that a lot of students struggle with, and that is it just becomes very repetitive. Instead of having 3 or 4 distinctive reasons to support his thesis, the student simply just keeps repeating his thesis throughout the essay. So here's this first topic sentence. One reason the SAT is giving too much significance is because colleges and universities rely on SAT scores in the admissions process. Well, that's essentially the same thing you said in your thesis statement. You're just repeating yourself. So, you need different reasons. And one thing that I think was very weak in this paper is the student didn't do any research really on the test itself. If you read this paper, the person doesn't have any sources connected to what makes the SAT a poor test. Why is standardized testing bad? They just say that colleges use it too much. So here we have first person, you want to avoid that. And then this, I have here, another factor is that a large portion of academic scholarship money available to incoming college students is dependent on the SAT scores of the students. Well, it's the same thing you said in your thesis statement. You're just repeating yourself once again. So instead of just repeating your thesis statement, you need to come up with reasons to support your thesis. So that's definitely something I'm looking for. Something else the student does, I only marked it this one time, but in at least 2 or 3 of his main points, he has these rhetorical questions. Why is not qualifying for scholarship money determined by other things, like GPA, class rank, and specialized skill? The problem with rhetorical questions is that they're kind of a cop-out. So instead of actually making an argument or giving support, you ask a question. And that's really not a very strong form of logic. It would be much stronger for him to actually say, scholarship money should be determined by GPA, by class rank, by specialized skills. And here's why. So don't rely too much on rhetorical questions. Every once in a while you can use one, maybe in an introduction or a conclusion, but you want to avoid especially overusing them within your argument. Stick to actually using solid support. And then again, another repetition, just repeating information. So just make sure you're not spinning your wheels as far as your reasons. Each paragraph needs to be distinctive. So, and I would say for this paper, probably the strongest point was the last one, and I didn't have a comment here, but I'll point that out in the video. that this last point where he talks about male and female males and females scoring consistently differently on the SAT, and that shows the weakness of the test. So this is one paragraph where this student finally addresses the actual test and why it's problematic, instead of just repeating that it shouldn't be used, it shouldn't be used, it shouldn't be used. So this last point is actually his strongest one. So yeah, that is really, I think, all I had to say about these sample essays. And definitely let me know if you have any questions about this essay. I'm sure I'll be writing you more reminders and announcements, and we'll be talking about it more as the course progresses. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions.